Hi, Jonathan York, Bay Financial Partners, look at the investment markets. Latest inflation data out of the US, the personal consumption expenditure, the Fed sort of preferred inflation gauge, that was pretty encouraging, showing just a 0.1 increase in the month of May, and that gave a 2.6 year-on-year reading versus 2.8 last time out. So that just sort of backs up the Fed's sort of recent comments from Fed Chair Powell that the Fed is making some reasonable progress on inflation, but just needs to see a little bit more progress being made before they can look at cutting interest rates. Which does sort of feed into the minutes from the last meeting that looking at a Fed rate cut towards sort of the end of the year, maybe November. But also as well, just looking at one rate cut this year and then maybe 2 to 3 next year. But as always, that is data dependent. But certainly the US economy is still pushing along at a pretty good rate. Latest sort of surveys, University of Michigan consumer confidence, that was up, coming in at 68.2. So interestingly, we sort of talk still about potential sort of Fed rate cut towards year end. Interest rates haven't really done too much in the US. The 2-year is 4.74 and the 10-year is 4.43. But obviously with the big July the 4th holiday this week, expected to be pretty quiet trading for the rest of the week in the US. Now, obviously, on the political front, some pretty major news. The Trump-Biden televised debate was really an unmitigated disaster, really, for President Biden. The first sort of 20-30 minutes sort of stuttering, a little bit incoherent, and really didn't seem to know what was being discussed and what his answers were going to be. Now that obviously puts the Democrats now in a pretty difficult position because, with the election in November, do you look to sort of try and replace Biden now? Obviously, he's the sitting president as well, so that makes it even more difficult to replace him. But, certainly in the polls, not trending particularly well. But then on the other side, Trump came out with his usual sort of banter, and half of the things he said were just untrue. Although potentially he did have one sort of victory out there from the Supreme Court, ruling that the president does have some sort of immunity for official acts. Now, obviously, the key point there is what an official act is. And then it has some major implications for potential trials for the insurrection on the January the 6th riots. Now, oil continues to tick higher, currently trading 83 and change. And that's really on the back of potential supply issues coming out of the Middle East. Now, in the UK, obviously, all eyes on the election. Currently it looks like Labour will have a pretty comfortable majority and a pretty big majority as well, which potentially could lead to a 2-term parliament for the Labour Party. And that's really on the back of the sort of centre-right vote being split, with the Reform Party of Nigel Farage coming in and really just sort of messing up the voting patterns. But again, the UK economy is performing pretty well. Inflation's down, and potentially you're looking at a rate cut now for the Bank of England, probably obviously after the election now, but potentially sort of August, September, or October. Now in France, it looks like the election's going the other way, with the far right gaining a reasonable majority in the first round, and is now a lot of sort of political horse trading, trying to sort of negate that sort of far right bloc from gaining power in France. But at present, it's not looking good for Macron. Now in Australia, a little bit of surprise on the inflation. Latest CPI data, that showed a bit of an increase there, coming in at 3.6 last time out. This time was in at 4%. Now after the minutes from the Reserve Bank as well, potentially is that enough to see a rate hike in Australia? Probably just have to wait and see, because I think they'd like to see some further concrete evidence that inflation really is sort of pushing up. Rather than just, potentially just a sort of blip for 1 month. Now here in New Zealand, the economy is still sort of very sluggish out there. 5 out of the last 7 quarters have been negative growth. Potentially you're only looking at sort of 0.1, 0.2 growth for the last 12 months. And that's been sort of borne out by the latest ANZ business confidence, which fell a further 5 points. Now, obviously, the major issue is that the Reserve Bank just has one remit, which is to get inflation down. That is currently above its sort of 2% target range. So, potentially rates aren't coming down anytime soon in New Zealand. But when you look at the economy, it certainly needs a bit of a boost out there, and a rate cut, will be certainly well received. Now there is that Infratel capital raise at present. Applications that have got to be in by Monday. So if you are looking for income options, go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.